Welcome, members. I apologize for the delay. We had a little problem with our audio recording, but that has now been resolved. Members, today is July 8th, 2020. This is a joint hearing between the Judiciary Committee and the Transportation Committee. The topic of the hearing this morning would be capital security and capital property damage that occurred in Minneapolis and St. Paul between May 26th, 2020 and June 10th, 2020. We will be, very shortly, we're going to review a video that has been put together, after which I will bring up Colonel Matt Langer for testimony. So if you wish to run the, Mr. Walsh, if you wish to turn on the video at this time.
In Boston, protesters beheaded the Christopher Columbus statue. In Virginia, they threw it in the water. These images caught the attention of Native American groups in Minnesota who have petitioned for years to take down a 1930s-era Columbus statue here.
And I spoke with one of my elders this morning, and he said, you can't do it that way. It can't be passive anymore. You have to go down there. You got to take it down. Mike
Forsha of the American Indian Movement Twin Cities claims he bought a rope and let others do the heavy lifting.
After we were done, I was told that, yes, I will be arrested. I will be charged with criminal damage to property, but that's part of what happens. So I'm willing to take that.
When I was there was one state trooper parked about a block away when I arrived, but that trooper drove away while I was there. 45 minutes later, this happened. Now, protesters, we believe mostly from the American Indian Movement, put a rope around the statue of Christopher Columbus and pulled it down. Historians have documented Columbus's involvement in the slave trade centuries ago, and statues have been targeted in other states as well. The threat to this statue was well known today and circulated on social media. So well known, I even asked the Public Safety Commissioner, John Harrington, about the threat less than 90 minutes before it was torn down.
Are you aware of a threat that is making its rounds on social media to the Christopher Columbus statue on the grounds of the state capitol in about 90 minutes from now, groups saying they're going to come and try to take it down?
Yes, I am. I've heard that through social media. Colonel Langer and his staff plan to be out there to meet with the groups, to explain to them the process that is already in existence for if you want to have a statue or you want to have something removed from the Capitol grounds. There is a lawful process for doing that. And we will be out there to meet with them to have that conversation about if this is something that the community wants and the legislature agrees with and all the parties that have to be part to that decision, then there is a lawful process to do that. But we plan to be out there to meet with them this afternoon.
Well, it went a lot further than that. These are the pictures I took of the statue at about 4:15 this afternoon. I had also asked the governor about the issue of possibly removing statues of anyone with racist backgrounds, and he briefly addressed the issue before turning to another subject.
Governor, should the state consider those, should we revisit some of these statues? I know this has come up in previous years. Is there going to be a renewed interest in things like Christopher Columbus?
Yes, I think we should. I'm a geographer and historian by trade.
And that's all he said about it before he changed the subject. From our photojournalist on the scene, it appears the one state trooper who addressed the protesters then went into the state capitol, we think with a list of their demands, and left them unattended. It was then when protesters took matters into their own hands and tore the statue down, and it was minutes later before more state troopers in protective gear showed up, who you just saw in Beth's live report a moment ago. So like I said, Paul, a curious chain of events. We're going to try to piece all of this together. This all comes as the governor was actually announcing a special session that is going to start on Friday, when they talked about having more security at the Capitol because they do anticipate protests because of some of the volatile issues they will be taking up. Live in the newsroom, Tom Hauser, 5 Eyewitness News.
Governor Tim Walz calling lawmakers back for a special session starting Friday.
He's asking them to make some major changes in the wake of George Floyd's death. Political reporter Theo Keith is live outside the Capitol right now. Theo, all right, we want to talk about the special session, but what is going on behind you right now?
Yeah, we're having some breaking news out here on the south lawn of the state capitol. About 150 demonstrators just gathered, and they have just torn down the statue of Christopher Columbus. The statue has been here since 1931. Columbus, of course, has been very much criticized in recent years as people look at his history again as a conqueror and not as an explorer. So these protesters came here to tear down the Christopher Columbus statue, maybe 12 feet tall or so. And just literally 15 seconds before you came to us, the statue did come down. This group of protesters had put two ropes around Columbus's neck. They then backed into the street here outside the Capitol. They tore the statue down. The statue fell onto the sidewalk to a big cheer, as you're hearing here again, cheering. Now, you may be asking about law enforcement response to this. We've seen exactly one state trooper who was out here earlier today urging the group to follow the typical process for getting a statue torn down, which is to petition and work through legal channels. Obviously, this group had no interest in following that, and so they tore the statue down. Now, if Brian, you're listening to me, Brian, photographer, is a group of state troopers that has just left the state capitol building, coming out front here, and presumably they're on the way to deal with this crowd in some way that hadn't happened earlier today. You can see the line of maybe 30 state troopers out there on the state capitol lawn. This is the south lawn. They have gone through the fence of the state capitol that's currently surrounding the Capitol. It went up about 2 weeks ago as the National Guard came in to try to protect the Capitol. It's still up, even though the Guard has left. Those state troopers have been in the Capitol ever since. They appear to be dressed with shields and batons, and they're coming this way. I don't know how they're going to deal with the crowd yet. The crowd is not yet leaving. Some of them are taking pictures of the Christopher Columbus statue that is on the sidewalk as the state troopers come over in an attempt to deal with the crowd. The crowd now, I can tell you, has seen the troopers come over this way, and some of them are leaving. Some of them are leaving the Capitol, while several more of them are staying to see what kind of a confrontation this is going to be. Again, as we wait for the state troopers to come over this way, there was only one trooper here earlier telling the people not to tear down the statue. The people did not listen to that. They had no intention of following the normal process for dealing with statues, and so they tied two ropes around Christopher Columbus statue's neck and tore it to the ground as it's on the sidewalk now. The state troopers have stopped. They have not advanced any further. There's probably now 40 yards between the troopers and the people who tore the statue down. And we'll see what kind of a move the state wants to make next. I can tell you again, the state did not make much of a move to prevent this statue from coming down.
They said there would be no arrest. They're going to come out. They're going to clean it up. It might take a while. I said we'd like to stay here to film you cleaning him up, and they said that would be no problem.
And a State Patrol spokesperson told us tonight that they do plan to charge the person that they're calling a, quote, instigator, and they say that members of the State Patrol tried to get people to use legal avenues to try to continue petitioning for the removal of the statue before it was torn down. And just about 10 minutes ago, Governor Walz released a statement saying that while he knows many Minnesotans see the Columbus statue as a, quote, legacy of genocide, he does not agree with not using those legal processes and said that people shouldn't have taken the matter into their own hands. Those were his words in his statement sent to our newsroom.
There was about 2 years ago, we were there, maybe 3, And they said that the Capitol grounds has their own department, and they're the ones who decide on the statues and the monuments. And so we started that process just like it was done before and before. And so yesterday when the State Patrol came out and he had his, handful of paperwork that showed the process, and we told him when we left yesterday, he was going to be coming down, and we were willing to be arrested for it. And he promised he wouldn't arrest us, and he didn't. And it was very, very peaceful. It was very beautiful. And within 3 minutes, he was down, and the process took 20 years, and it's still up there. And so when I spoke with the governor and the lieutenant governor a couple of months ago about this, I agreed to wait for the process, and we were going to have it done, through the proper channels, and we were going to have a big celebration and a big powwow on the Capitol grounds, but the process just took too long.
The captain who is in charge of Capitol security let me know just before yesterday's press conference that there was a protest scheduled for about 5 o'clock leaving from Minneapolis and the conversation was that they were going to take down that statue of Christopher Columbus. The State Patrol organized a team of about 25 troopers at the Capitol. They took the protocol that we have that we've always used, and in fact, it's the protocol that we use regularly when we have protests, to have a senior representative of the State Patrol to go out, talk to the folks that are organizing the protests, and then create what are the rules we're going to have here. Is this a peaceful protest? Is this going to be an aggressive protest? And that determines what our position is. The captain went out with a representative from the Department of Public Safety, Nigel Perrault. He's the Native American liaison from the Department of Public Safety, to have that conversation with the protest leader. As they were having that conversation, members of the group threw a rope around the statue and pulled it off. So from what I know about this is he went out there to have that conversation. They were having the conversation. The rope went around the statute. And as the statue came down, the troopers were coming out of the Capitol to secure that area. They were not able to get out there in time.
Yeah, well, there will be consequences. This was an act of civil disobedience. The people doing it clearly understood and were prepared to take those consequences. Each of these incidents is deciding, and we've seen it in this room over the last few weeks, the criticisms of being too aggressive with the use of chemical weapons and other non-lethal, and then some cases of being overly aggressive with them. The leaders on the ground have to make a decision that we're in. These people came, and I think I certainly do not condone, nor is this the right way to go about this change. I do think to the public out there, and don't confuse the random burning of a liquor store with an act of civil disobedience. And it doesn't mean that we're condoning the behavior, but I think to understand the motivating factors that were there. I say this as someone from Mankato who has spent every December 26th for the last couple decades down on the Sidon Riverfront where 38 Dakota were hung. There is a lot of emotion around this, as there were with the paintings in Capitol, as there were with B'day-McCoska, as there is with the seal, and I mentioned this yesterday. So I want to be very clear. There will be consequences for this. They will be accordingly to what our laws are about doing this. We are going to, and I'm going to tell people, we have to create a system where people feel like we can have a debate and an outcome on this. But quite honestly, I think when it comes to the Capitol grounds, Many folks don't know how to do that, and I'm not certain they feel like there's a way to remove them. So I just want to be very clear. I won't condone the behavior. There will be consequences for it. It was an act of civil disobedience that we need to make sure people feel that there is a proper outlet to address what are legitimate concerns around what they view as a genocidal monument that they have to walk to in their democracy.
So first of all, I'm not going to perform for folks. I'm not going to feign sadness. I will not shed a tear over the loss of a statue that honored someone who, of his own admission, sold 9- and 10-year-old girls into sex slavery. So let me start there. In my role as the Capital Area Architectural and Planning Board Chair, or the CAP Board as it's called, I want to be really clear. We need to follow a process that's important and frankly long overdue about the artwork, the imagery, the symbols within the Capitol building and on the Capitol grounds. All Minnesotans should feel safe and welcomed and valued when they step into and on the grounds of their house, the Minnesota State Capitol. And to be clear, the current process is not well defined. We have had these conversations at the CAP Board, and we will continue these conversations because even those who are familiar with state government have not heard of the CAP Board. And this indicates that we need to do things differently. In partnership with the Minnesota Historical Society, we need to evaluate and re-evaluate what is displayed at the Minnesota State Capitol. We need to build a process that is accessible, proactive, community-driven, and transparent. In the terms of the statue of Christopher Columbus, I wish we had a better process that had been followed. I wish the removal had been different. But I am not sad that it's gone.
Did you hear from the Lieutenant Governor at all? Because she tweeted and said, I'm sad the statue of Christopher Columbus is gone. Or she said, I can't say that I'm sad that the statue of Christopher Columbus is gone. I'm not. Our state is long overdue for a hard look at the symbols, statues, and icons that were created without the input of many of our communities. That was her response. Have you had any conversation with her?
I haven't spoken to Peggy yet, no. I've known her for over 20 years. I know she was there with us in spirit, and I understand why she couldn't help us pull it down yesterday. But I think if she wasn't the Lieutenant Governor, I think she would have been right there with us.
Now, 2 weeks after protesters took down the Christopher Columbus statue at the Minnesota State Capitol, the state has not announced any arrests. Tomorrow, the people in charge of Capitol statues will meet for the first time since the incident, but it may be a long process to decide what happens to that statue. Political reporter Theo Keith takes a look.
The Christopher Columbus statue used to sit atop that base right back there. It's been gone 2 weeks, and it does not appear anyone's been arrested. Protesters brought down the Columbus statue with no resistance, despite at least 2 hours warning. 14 days later, the state is still investigating who was involved in the incident, even though it played out on live TV. At the time, the governor said people would be held accountable.
There will be consequences for it.
As for the statue, its fate lies with the Capital Area Architectural Planning Board. The CAP Board, as it's called, is scheduled to meet Thursday. In a news release, the board says there is no formal policy or process addressing removal of monuments. That contradicts what state officials said both before and after Columbus came down.
If you want to have a statue or you want to have something removed from the Capitol grounds, there is a lawful process for doing that.
We saw a state trooper telling protesters there was a process. The governor also said there was a process. But the process isn't all that clear. What we know is state law puts the CAP Board in charge. Its executive secretary says the board has never gotten a formal request to remove Columbus. But the law does not spell out the standards on what stays and what goes. Deciding that could take months or a year. The Native American protesters said pulling down the Columbus statue was a healing moment because Columbus conquered, enslaved, and killed Native people. Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, who is Ojibwe, chairs the board that's in charge of statues and is calling for a review of all artwork at the Capitol. As for where Columbus is now, a state official told me he's in a secure location. From the Capitol, Theo Keith, Fox 9.
At this time, we're going to move to testimony. I would invite Colonel Langer to come to the testifying table. Good morning, Colonel.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thanks for having me. I have a brief opening remark, if you wouldn't mind. I'd like to read that and then stand for any questions that you have.
Well, I'm going to proceed with questions, Colonel Langer, if you don't mind. What I'd like to do, Colonel, is establish the organizational chart of the troopers in an effort to help members understand.
Mr. Chair.
Mr.
Chair.
For what purpose do you wish to be recognized?
To make an inquiry of yourself, Mr. Chair.
Senator Dibble.
Why would you not allow Colonel Langer to make some opening
Because
remarks?
I've got questions that I wish to put to
Right, maybe he has some important information
Colonel
that
Langer.
needs to be. Colonel Langer, I will ask you to read your statement when you're finished with these questions. Thank you.
Colonel Langer, my understanding is that you are I'm going to say the head of the troopers. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, yes, I'm colonel, and in law that's defined as the chief supervisor of the State Patrol.
And could you tell me how you arrive at being appointed as the colonel or the head of the State Patrol? What's the process? How does it happen?
Mr. Chair, that process is described in 299D, and I was, started as a trooper in 1999, worked my way up through the ranks, and then was appointed into the position as colonel by the previous Commissioner of Public Safety.
And would the Commissioner of Public Safety then be your immediate supervisor?
Mr. Chair, under the law, I think 299D reads that way, that the Commissioner of Public Safety appoints the colonel of the State Patrol.
Could you describe for us then the organizational chart, if you will, of those who you are responsible for supervising?
Mr. Chair, directly under me is the Lieutenant Colonel of the State Patrol. That's the position of Assistant Chief. We have 4 majors over different areas of the State Patrol. And then below the rank of major, we have captains. Specifically to the Capitol Security, there's a captain in charge of Capitol Security. Under the rank of captain, there are lieutenants. And then lieutenant for the State Patrol is the lowest supervisory rank. There are technical sergeants and station sergeants, but that description does not include supervisory work for the State Patrol. And then under the technical sergeants and sergeants, of course, are the state troopers.
And you mentioned, Colonel Langer, at the captain level, there is a captain that is responsible for Capitol Security. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, correct.
And could you tell us, in terms of the Capitol or the Capitol complex, what does that entail?
Mr. Chair, the captain of Capitol Security oversees the security on the entire Capitol complex, and that position also oversees the executive protection detail that is also our responsibility under 299D.
And but the Capitol complex itself, I think, but I'm not sure, entails more than just the Capitol. Are you responsible for areas in the Capitol complex other than the Capitol building?
Mr. Chair, absolutely. We're responsible for securing all of the buildings on the entire Capitol complex.
And what does the Capitol complex consist of?
Mr. Chair, I think there is a legal description that I don't have in front of me at the moment, but it includes the mall area, it includes the state office building on this side to DOT, to Centennial, up to Revenue, Health. It's an expansive area with a lot of buildings.
That explanation is fine. I just wanted to get an idea of the area that we are talking about. The captain that you mentioned, I take it there is a captain that is put in charge and is responsible for security at the Capitol and the Capitol complex, and that would be for both persons and property. Would that be correct?
Mr. Chair, correct.
What's the name of the captain that is responsible for security here at the Capitol?
Mr. Chair, it'd be Captain Eric Roski.
And could you spell the last name for me?
R-O-E-S-K-E.
I'm sorry?
R-O-E-S-K-E.
The topic of the hearing this morning, Colonel Langer, is both Capitol security and damage that occurred here at the Capitol or the Capitol complex between May 26, 2020 and June 10th, 2020. With those dates in mind, Colonel Langer, what is the first time that the troopers began aware of any type of threats to the Capitol complex?
Mr. Chair, can you give me the beginning date of the timeline again?
Sure. May 26th through June 10th.
Yeah.
And we will get to June 10th, the day when the property was actually damaged. But I'm curious, did the troopers receive any credible threats against the Capitol from any time, let's say May 26th to June 9th, any time in that time period?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that was definitely a period of unrest across the area, and the Capitol was not excluded from that. We swelled our staffing at the Capitol to considerable numbers in the aftermath of Mr. Floyd's death in Minneapolis, both with the State Patrol and with the National Guard, and working in concert with both the local police department and the county sheriff. There was at least one credible threat that I'm aware of that involved the Capitol complex toward the end of that week, of the Memorial Day week, and that, to my knowledge, is the only threat that we deemed to be credible, other than just things that we were hearing and speculation that folks might have this building or the Capitol building of interest to them.
Do you have a date on that threat that you just referenced?
You know, Mr. Chair, if I recall, it would have been the Friday of Memorial Day, but I'd like to confirm that and not do that just based on memory.
Can you tell us exactly what that threat was?
Well, I think that after reporting on that threat was made public, that there was perhaps interest in burning the Capitol.
And in response to that threat of burning the Capitol, what did you do as the head officer of the troopers?
Mr. Chair, that week was an incredible week in the organization's history and the state's history, but that entire week included swelling our staffing considerably at the Capitol and also erecting the fence that you see remaining today.
And when you say you swelled the personnel at the Capitol, what do you normally have at the Capitol, and how many additional personnel were deployed to the Capitol in response to this threat?
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to talk in as much detail perhaps as you want. I also would like to just provide fair warning that sometimes discussing our actual staffing can adversely impact security at the Capitol.
Okay, I understand. Are you able to tell us how many troopers were on staff after you received the credible threat?
Mr. Chair, I can characterize that by saying there were hundreds, at times hundreds of law enforcement officers and the National Guard working around the Capitol during the period of the unrest and the period of time when we saw a lot of activity in the metro area.
I'm not sure I understood your answer. Colonel, I just got a note asking me to have you pull the mic in closer. People are having a hard time hearing you. I'm not sure I understood your answer. All I'm looking for is to get an idea as to the number of personnel that were at the Capitol complex protecting the Capitol, if you are able to answer that question without breaching security?
Mr. Chair, I understand the question, and I would characterize it as at times we had hundreds of both state troopers, DNR officers, and National Guards members throughout 24-hour periods protecting the Capitol and the complex during that period.
Prior to June 10th, and after the threat that you believe occurred on Friday of Memorial Day weekend, where there was a threat to burn the Capitol, between those two times, did you receive any other credible threats to the Capitol complex?
Mr. Chair, not that I have in front of me or that I recall.
At some point, Colonel, I'll call it a chain link fence was put up. It looked like it's set in some temporary stands of some kind. Are you familiar with the fence that I'm referring to?
Mr. Chair, yes.
Do you know, Colonel, when that fence was put up?
Mr. Chair, I don't have the date that it was put up. I was aware of it being put up, and I'm aware of how it was put up.
Do you know who ordered it to be put up?
I do, Mr. Chair. It was Captain Roski made that request of the Department of Administration after his, I guess, review of what was going on around the Metro, his review of his role and what he thought would be in the best interest to facilitate our ability to protect the Capitol building.
A more direct question, I guess, Colonel. Do you know if it was put up in response to the threat to burn the Capitol?
Mr. Chair, I don't know. It doesn't reconcile with the timeline in my head, but I'd have to confirm that direct with Captain Roski.
I want to turn then, Colonel, to June 10th, which is, of course, the date on which public property was destroyed or damaged, I should say, more properly, here at the Capitol. Can you tell us when you became aware of the threat that there was property here at the Capitol that would be damaged or destroyed?
Mr. Chair, without looking at the actual email that came into me, it would have been about noon or just after noon that day when I became aware of a Facebook event that was posted describing the event.
Once you received that information at around noon, what did you do?
Mr. Chair, I had information from one of our majors who oversees the Capitol. They brought the event to my attention. They brought their plan forward, saying what they were going to do to treat it as though it would be any other intended damage to property at the Capitol. They described their plan. What I've said is they had a plan A and a plan B, and they orally described what that was during that afternoon.
What was plan A?
Plan A, Mr. Chair, was to go out with a copy of Chapter 15B, the law, and Nigel Perot. Mr. Perot is the tribal liaison for the Department of Public Safety. And Plan A was to go out and engage with whoever did arrive at the time that they showed up and discuss expectations and discuss our role to protect the property and hope that that would work to not have any damage occur on the Capitol grounds.
Did or was Plan A put forth? Did the State Patrol go out with the statute and engage the demonstrators?
Mr. Chair, yes.
What was Plan B?
Mr. Chair, Plan B was being exercised at the same time Plan A was occurring. Plan B was to have roughly 35 troopers in their what we call turtle suits or their protective gear ready should Plan A prove to be not successful or should we face something that we hadn't expected coming our way.
Where were the 35 troops stationed at this time?
Mr. Chair, they were assembling between the Department of Administration building and making their way through the Capitol. So they were still arriving shortly before 5 o'clock, but the bulk of them were in the Capitol within the chain link fence, staged.
The time frame that I have been shown And I'm just going to ask you if it's correct or not. The time frame I have is that troopers began assembling at the administration building at about 3:45. Would that be correct?
Mr. Chair, that's correct, of the troopers that we were bringing in for this event.
And can you tell us by 4:30 how many troopers were assembled at either the administration building or within the Capitol?
Mr. Chair, at exactly 4:30 p.m., I don't have the number of troopers that were there, but the total number of troopers ended up being approximately 35.
At between 4:30 and 5 o'clock, do you have any idea as to how many demonstrators were present in the area where the statute was torn down?
Mr. Chair, our notes indicate that at about 4:20 p.m., there were just a couple of protesters.
2?
That's what I have, correct.
How many troopers were on the scene at the statue at 4:30?
Mr. Chair, what our initial, when I referred to Plan A, was Captain Roski and Mr. Nigel Perot were the first ones out there to visit with whoever was there to be part of the protest.
Was Captain Rossi then the only trooper that was at the scene of the statute at 4:30?
Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Fast forwarding then another half an hour at about 5 o'clock. How many demonstrators are you aware of that were present at the statute?
Mr. Chair, that the number of people out there, I think, is a better way for us to classify who was there, whether they were a member of the media, whether they were there just to watch, or whether they were there as a member of the group protesting the statue. I'm not sure, but I would say 50 to 75 people probably.
And at 5 o'clock, would it be correct that the only trooper that was present then was Captain Rossi?
Mr. Chair, that's correct.
And that was, he was there for the purpose of engaging in Plan A, which was to talk to the demonstrators or whoever was present at the statute. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, yes.
And upon having that discussion, then Captain Rossi left. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware that he physically left. He stepped aside to use the phone.
Are you aware of whether or not Captain Rossi or any other trooper was present when the demonstrators or the people that you have described climbed up the statute, put ropes on it, and pulled it down? Were there any troopers present?
Mr. Chair, my understanding is that Captain Roski witnessed that as he was on the phone and on the radio to call for Plan B to be enacted.
And if Captain Rossi was present, when I look at the video, it looks to me like criminal damage to property, which would be a felony if the value of the damage was over $1,000. And I think that there was $157,000 in damage that was done to that statute. Did Captain Rossi arrest anybody at that time when he witnessed the statute coming down?
Mr. Chair, we did not make any arrests on this night.
You had indicated, Colonel Langer, that you wanted to make a brief statement. I'm going to allow you to do that at this time. That's all of the questions that I have, and then I'll go to member questions. Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I think everyone on the committee knows me, but for the record, my name is Matt Langer, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as Colonel of the Minnesota State Patrol. Thank you for inviting me to testify about this important topic. The Minnesota State Patrol is a large organization that covers the entire state of Minnesota. And while our primary mission and the majority of our resources are focused on traffic safety work as directed by state law, an important function of our work occurs right here at the state capitol in the Capitol complex. Our general fund appropriation is just over $9 million each year. With that appropriation, we do our best to provide excellent security services across the entire Capitol complex. We do this with a dispatch center with access to security cameras and alarm points, 54 Capitol security officers who are non-sworn, an emergency manager, 2 support staff positions, and 12 uniformed troopers, not including our executive protection unit. The members of the State Patrol who work in Capitol security believe in what they do. They understand their responsibility to keep the Capitol safe. This includes the people who work, visit, or legislate on the complex, as well as the property. We work diligently to uphold our organization's core values of respect, integrity, courage, honor, and excellence. Our responsibility and obligation for this work at the Capitol is also set forth under state law in Chapter 299D-03. Part of our work to keep the Capitol safe involves proactive patrols with a visible deterrent goal of maintaining the peace. Part of our work also includes the reactive response to calls for service. In either case, we believe in both preventing criminal activity and investigating and holding those accountable who violate the law. It's interesting to note that in any given year, there are 14,000 assists to the public that our folks do on this complex, over 25,000 security checks. There are over 900 permitted events on the Capitol complex. We respond to over 100 medical calls, 100 alarm calls. We respond to about 40 calls dealing with emotionally disturbed individuals. And each year we have fewer than 10 disorderly conduct or assault situations on this complex. 14,000 people work on the complex and about over 1 million people visit it each year. Some of this is in hindsight, but I'm willing to answer any questions you have. I also want to tell you that the BCA submitted their case for consideration of charging those responsible for the Christopher Columbus statue being toppled to the Ramsey County Attorney's Office yesterday. That includes 3 individuals at this time, and their investigation continues for other potential persons who may be charged at a later date. I also want to be very clear that it's my expectation as Colonel of the Minnesota State Patrol that individuals involved be held accountable for their actions, but that actual charging decision lies with the Ramsey County Attorney's Office. Mr. Chair, I appreciate being able to read that statement, and I stand ready for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Colonel. We'll go to member questions at this time. Chairman Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Langer, sorry to demote you. Colonel Langer, it's good to see you again. I'd like to take us away from this particular incident regarding a monument on the Capitol grounds, but I wanted to kind of ask a question or a series of questions. I've been thinking about this. Imagine an individual informs the State Patrol of their intention to commit a specific crime. That individual commits the crime. It's witnessed by State Patrol. It's videoed, video recorded. And the individual then on tape freely admits that he committed the crime. What reasons would there be for that individual not to be arrested at that time?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair and Mr. Chair and Chair Limmer, I think that's a fair question, and I certainly understand that criticism. The conversation that night, as I was discussing it with our folks who were involved, is I said, and the commissioner and I talked about, we want people arrested that were involved with destroying the statue. The strategic decision that was made based on the input that I received from people I trust at the scene was they did not believe that that was going to end well, and that was going to be a very difficult dilemma for our folks on the scene. Now, we were ready. We had equipment. We had chemical resources. We had 35 highly trained state troopers with all the equipment to do that. But the conversation that we had, quite honestly, is to what end? If we know who did it, and the person is cooperative, and there's not the threat of further harm, we shifted into being strategic and shifting the focus to the investigation and holding those accountable through formal complaint. But I think the question about why someone wasn't arrested is fair criticism, and I take that. And for me, I was also frustrated by that because our job is to arrest people for their conduct if it is illegal. This was a highly volatile situation that had the potential to be extremely ugly, using force and using chemical. And it was our decision to not go that route on this evening.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Limmer.
It's kind of a picture of before the destruction of public property versus the scene afterward. The way I try to perceive it is when an individual is not arrested in that type of setting, or they're not even charged with committing the crime, it seems like the individual was roaming around after the crowd had mostly dispersed. And I can't help but kind of recall some of the public comments that I received in my district. The public seemed to be concerned about the reaction of law enforcement in that setting. And it appeared as though we were actually tolerating some degree of lawlessness. Would you agree with that perception by the public?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair and Chair Limmer, I certainly received some of that same feedback as well from people on both sides of this issue with different perspectives. It's for us, I think it's always really difficult to describe what it's like to be there in that moment versus what it's like to watch it on TV. And I assure this committee that the folks that we had out there were ready for anything that they had to deal with. We chose discretion. And for that, we can be accused of many different things, including just being witness to lawlessness or party to lawlessness. That's not who we are as an organization. That's not the people we hire. That's certainly not who I am. But I also understand the complex environment we're living in today. And I understand the fallout that occurs with conversations about using too much force and the fallout that can occur with not using enough force. I think it's a fair criticism to say maybe there wasn't enough force in this case. But at the end of the day, the troopers that came out as part of Plan B opted for discretion, opted to protect the statue from being further destroyed, opted to keep the crowd back, and opted to hold those accountable after the fact through the investigative process and the charging process with the Ramsey County Attorney.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I recall, June 10th was the date that this property was disrupted, and approximately a week and a half had transpired where there was civil unrest in the metropolitan area, especially in the urban core, and it did ripple out into some of our suburbs. It seems that this was an extension of that disruption and that civil unrest on June 10th. The question that I had is, as your experience in the law enforcement profession, if a suspect is able to commit a crime while witnessed by police and then captured by video and then later publicly admits to that crime, do you believe that behavior of the suspect, having no reaction immediately by law enforcement, would tend to embolden others to continue that civil unrest? Because I sense that that's what started after George Floyd had been killed, and the public reaction on Lake Street and other locations in St. Paul, and that there didn't seem to be much of a public reaction then. And is that a consequence of not effective reaction to the civil unrest and the property damage and the looting that went on?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair and Chair Limmer, that's an extremely complicated question, but a good one. I think in my professional opinion, there's no question that there's a deterrent effect toward a police presence. Sometimes that's more successful than other times. There's a deterrent effect to being arrested. Sometimes that's more successful than other times. There's also a deterrent effect in holding accountable through the court system those that may have committed a crime, which obviously is outside the purview of my role in law enforcement. I think all three of those things contribute. but each situation is unique. And there are certainly cases where making one arrest creates a bigger problem than not making that one arrest, which is different than that person not being held accountable. And I know that I've been clear on this, and I want to remain clear. My expectation is that absolute accountability occurs for those that were involved in this property destruction. At the same time, I understand the criticism because I'm one of the most impatient people that you'll find, and so it's taken a while. And I understand that criticism because it's been frustrating for me as well, which is not a statement toward the BCA. There's a lot of complexity involved, and to be quite honest, when people are wearing masks, it's a lot harder to identify them later. That's not a secret, that's common sense. But they've worked diligently, they continue to work diligently, and this is a very unique situation, one that I haven't been placed in before, and the moment that it occurred, I fully anticipated every criticism on either side of the issue that has come before the State Patrol.
Thank you. I'm done.
Senator Yazinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Colonel Langer. I want to preface this by saying I have the utmost respect for you and the State Patrol, and I made that very clear to you in past, and I do as well today. But people in my district watched what went on and are frustrated, furious, mad, angry to watch what happened on our Capitol grounds that day. To my understanding, there was an hour and 19 minutes before the property was damaged and we had State Patrol on the Capitol grounds. Is that correct?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Jasinski, according to the timeline that everyone has in front of me, that's accurate in terms of when the troopers that were called in began arriving.
So my follow-up question is, thank you, Senator. Who made the decision to keep the majority of the troopers away from the rioters for that 1 hour and 19 minutes?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Jasinski, that would have been the decision of the supervisors involved at the Capitol. And I want to make one point, if I may. The original Facebook posting that gave rise to this incident, or gave us notice to this incident, indicated that the group was going to begin at 5 o'clock in Minneapolis and make their way to the state capitol. And that was definitely a factor in our Plan A versus Plan B and the timing in which we laid out that afternoon.
Senator Yazinski.
Thank you, Colonel. Again, listening to in the past couple of weeks to constituents, and I've been up north in Minnesota, I've been in my district quite a bit. People really think there's an ulterior motive here, and someone was asked to stand down for this, and that's what's frustrating. $153,000 in damage in front of all the news channels, and no arrests were made. That's what everybody is frustrated about. Again, for an hour and 19 minutes, and your security is phenomenal. I've been here when we've had issues in the Capitol, and they're there like that. And to see what happened that day with not responding, and I remember hearing comments one time about a trooper had to go inside or make a phone call, and everybody has radios. You're all on radios. Make a call and get people out there. Seeing a rope being thrown over the head of Christopher Columbus, you would think that'd be a pretty quick response, that something would be done right away. And in everything I've seen in the troopers across the state in my 4 years in the Senate, it's not respective of what I've seen before. I've seen much more quick response and things like that, and that's what I'm hearing from my people, and that's what they're mad about, and I'm mad about. Why did not something happen faster? You had the people there. You were literally hundreds of feet away. You saw it. We'd been known it was going to happen, and nothing got done, and that's what's really, really makes me angry and makes constituents, Minnesotans across the state, very, very angry to see what happened. And I'll tell you blankly, I mean, people think that a decision was made above you to stand down. And I believe that happened somewhere, and I know you can't make that statement, and I know you won't make that statement, but something happened that day that caused you guys not to respond the way you normally would, and that's my frustration. Second part is, there's an issue in Wisconsin, same thing, statues were being taken down, senators were being...
Senator Yazinski.
Senator Newman.
The inquiry that we are having today has to do with Capitol security at the Capitol here in Minnesota. I'm going to ask that you refrain from referring to other statutes being taken down in other capitals as being off topic.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I respect that, and I apologize. I just was on a roll. But thank you. That'll end my questions. But again, I have the utmost respect for your department, yourself, but I hear this in my district all the time. Everywhere I go, the grocery store, the resort, the post office, everywhere I hear, people want to know what happened that day and why did we not, as a state, respond to our Capitol security and the architecture, the history of what our Capitol respects. So thank you, thank you, Colonel Langer.
Colonel Langer, I will give you an opportunity to respond if you wish. I'm not sure there was a question in there or not.
Mr. Chair, Senator Jasinski, so as the Colonel, I see the entire state of Minnesota too, and so that as a result, I interface with constituents, stakeholders, sheriffs, elected officials, troopers from all walks of life all across the state, and I've heard the same criticism that you have. Whether it's someone that tags one of the buildings on the Capitol complex with graffiti, or steals a brass railing off a handrail, or takes down a statue, that's not what we tolerate as a state patrol. That's not who we are. I wish, especially today, but always, I wish we were perfect as an organization. I wish every event went off without a hitch with perfection, and hindsight would be, that was perfect, do that again next time. Maybe I'm in the wrong line of work because it grates at me. That has never happened yet. We have never had a perfect incident. Each time we learn, and each time we do our best, but we also recognize the next incident is not going to be like the one we just had. And so, as I've said all along, it's fair criticism to say we should have had 50 troopers out there at 4:30 that afternoon. That's fair criticism. The intelligence didn't tell us that they were going to be there at 5 o'clock. It's fair criticism to say that we should have had a heavy-handed approach immediately. Well, every other time we've dealt with these events at the Capitol, dialogue works. And that's usually what people expect at the state Capitol, dialogue. It didn't work this time. And in hindsight, maybe there was a different way to do this. I'm not so sure that it wouldn't have had equal or worse consequence with folks on the other side of the matter. I don't know. We're definitely on the point of the spear of the issues related to civil unrest, related to what society is feeling, and related to opinions on certain things in and around this complex. And it's our job to protect those items regardless of what people think and to uphold the laws that are on the books.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Colonel.
Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll ask the question that Senator Jasinski kind of asked, but more made a statement. Colonel Langer, did anyone ask you or anyone in the State Patrol to stand down and to not prevent that statue from being toppled and or to handle the anticipated incident in any particular manner?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair and Senator Dibble, the truth of this matter is not overly exciting. I articulated the plan that came together that afternoon, both Plan A and Plan B. I had the opportunity to communicate that plan to Commissioner Harrington. That discussion ensued, and I was never given any order other than to proceed with the plan that we had developed.
Senator Dibble.
Thank you. And Colonel Langer, can you confirm that your job is not simply to make arrests when a crime has been committed, but your job is to see to the safety of the public and the safety, when you're on this campus, the safety of the people who are here at this campus?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Dibble, our job is certainly much more than making arrests. And I would say the arrests that happen on the Capitol complex are remarkably low, considering the population of the Capitol complex that obviously ebbs and flows during different events throughout the year. But much more than making arrests.
Senator Dibble.
And Colonel Langer, can you describe for us, you alluded to it a little bit, but describe to us a little bit about what might go into a decision to exercise discretion given a certain particular set of circumstances and a particular dynamic around a gathering like this, the discretion that those on the scene might need to exercise when deciding whether or not to make arrests or maybe discretion to not simply cordon off the statute, the decision to not use chemical deterrents. What kinds of things are taken into consideration when exercising discretion around those kinds of decisions?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Dibble, again, a rather complex question, but we consider those options, and we have highly trained staff with what I consider to be the best equipment and some of the best people to do the type of work that you see the State Patrol doing, whether it's our traditional traffic safety work, the Capitol security work, or our work related to the recent civil unrest. It's really a weighing of all the potential consequences. And it's trying to see into the future with a crystal ball to predict the outcome. If there's one mistake that I've made over the years, and I've learned from it rapidly in my role as chief, I might tell people what I want done, but if people that I trust, and I trust my supervisors and other experts on the ground say, Colonel, that's a bad idea, I have learned to follow their advice. Because when I'm not there watching and being part of it and seeing what's going on, it gets us into big trouble, and it's unsuccessful if they start following my order from afar when they're on the ground saying, Colonel, that's a bad idea. And so when the discussion occurred about whether we should arrest the people involved, the word came back from those that were on the scene, and it was just that, Colonel, we don't think that's a good idea. I said, tell me why. They said, because we're trying to protect the statue and get us out of here, because the statue is the focal point of the group. We can certainly arrest one or two people. We think that's going to enrage the rest of the group. We're prepared to use chemical and force if we have to, but our preference would be to not do that. We think that's a bad idea. Just to elaborate on that point a little bit, and again, the criticism is fair, so I'm not trying to make excuses. If you watch the video, you see who's in that group. There's kids in that group. There's members of the media in that group. So decisions to use chemical, decisions to use force are very complicated and always come with fair scrutiny, as we've fully realized with our past work in the city of Minneapolis and other places. And so there's a lot that goes into those decisions. Now, I talked about this for probably 5 minutes. In reality, that decision has to occur within about 13 seconds. So it's complicated and difficult, and people on this committee are well aware hindsight is so clear. It's so clear. But at the moment, you're left with about 50% of the information that you actually need to make the perfect decision.
Senator Dibble.
Senator, it's Captain.
Colonel Langer, if you know.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Senator Dibble, I want to correctly characterize, I think Captain Roski stepped aside to get on the phone. I think it's been improperly characterized by some that he went back into the Capitol. That's not my understanding. From the time the rope went up, or the first individual climbed up with the rope and then pulled it down, it was less than 2 minutes.
I'm sorry?
Mr. Chair and Senator Dibble, it was less than 2 minutes from the time the first person climbed up, the rope went around, and the statue came down.
Right, thank you.
Senator Dibble.
Thank you. Colonel Langer, do you know if this event was being live streamed by any of the participants? Anyone there live streamed on Facebook? I actually don't know. But
Colonel Langer, if you know.
Mr. Chair, Senator Dibble, I don't know that fact.
Okay.
Senator Dibble.
Actually, 2 more questions, so 4 total. Mr. Chair, Colonel Langer, was anyone hurt? Any of the participants or any of the troopers in this incident? Any injuries?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Dibble, no troopers were hurt, and we're unaware of anybody else injured.
Great. Thank
Senator
you.
Dibble.
And Colonel Langer, remind us, you said that yesterday the case on 3 individuals was referred to the Ramsey County Attorney's Office for potential charging?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair and Senator Dibble, that's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Langer. It's Colonel Langer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Howe.
Mr. Chair, to that point, please.
Senator Yazinski? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to follow up on Senator Dibble's point. So with an hour and 19 minutes, Mr. Colonel Langer, it's my understanding that Plan A and Plan B were given to Commissioner Harrington, and at that time, he made the decision to go with Plan A at 1 hour and 19 minutes before. If that's what I understand Senator Dibble said, your question, can you just verify that?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair and Senator Jasinski, I could probably look back and find the exact time that I spoke with Commissioner Harrington, but we spoke about the dialogue, Plan A. We're going to send the captain and our tribal liaison out there, but we're also ready if that doesn't work. So that's how I refer to Plan A and Plan B. Now, with the timeline here, between the dialogue ending and the statute coming down, it was just a couple of minutes. And so that's when we switched from Plan A to Plan B, and it's a fair criticism to say we didn't get to Plan B fast enough. I think it's also a fair point to say that if you talk to those that were involved, they didn't think that that statute would come down near as easily as it did and as rapidly as it did. So we didn't have time to get to Plan B to get the troopers out to prevent the ropes from pulling the statute down.
Mr. Chair, also
Senator Yazinski.
So when you say Plan A and Plan B, you're saying that the way it would schedule-wise, Plan A would be enacted first, and then Plan B. It wasn't choice one or choice two. Is phase one, phase two is a better statement of Plan A? Because my understanding, the way it was one plan this way and one plan was this way, and you chose to go with the one plan. But can you just comment on that? Because I thought it was put as one plan or another plan. So that's what I'd like to follow up on, please.
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Jasinski, perhaps my Plan A, Plan B description isn't accurate as it for everyone else as it is in my head. We didn't talk about we can do this or we can do that. I said, here's our approach. We're going to go forward. Staff looked at this. We want to have a dialogue. We're going to bring our tribal liaison. We hope that's successful. If that's not successful, we have a contingent of troopers that are ready and equipped to do what they need to do. And so the problem in this situation is we only had a minute or two between, if you use your terminology, to go from phase one to phase two to have those troopers, those 35 additional troopers with full capability there the moment that someone climbed up on that statue or the moment that the rope began being pulled.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Colonel Langer, thanks for coming in this morning. And you know I'm a big supporter of the troopers. But I'm concerned with it shows on the timeline that the leader was informed that if they toppled this statue and caused damage to property, they were going to be arrested. And I seen on the video that they were fully prepared to get arrested for this. And then later on, he says they were promised they would not be arrested. To me, that's pretty frustrating when they get told and they're prepared to do that, which means to me they're going to submit to being arrested, which doesn't, I think, goes against some of the characterization that there was going to be problems in deployment, even though we were prepared or you were prepared to deploy chemical agents and that. But wouldn't that, when you say that they turn around and then tell him he's not going to be arrested, well then why not take it down? I guess I'm frustrated. Who gave him the authority to make that decision? And I guess I know that you had stated earlier that we chose not to go that route. Can you be explicit on who we are that made that decision?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair and Senator Howe, so I don't know that I understand the entire question correctly, but if you watch some of the media report, things get conflated. So the conversation that we always have when we go talk to protest groups is, look, we don't want to arrest anybody. Here's what we're expecting. And 9 times out of 10 or more, that works. So that's the conversation that occurs. Whether that put in this guy's head, the individual you saw, that I'm never going to be arrested for anything I do, I don't think that's accurate, because he was informed that if he attempted to topple the statute, he would be arrested. Now, if you fast forward to once the statue is down and the group is they're hostile, surrounding the statue, as you can see on the video, it's one thing for one person to go willingly to be arrested. It's another thing for everyone else in the group to just be okay with that. And that was the decision made by the people at the scene that I trust to say, if we pull 1 or 2 people out of that crowd right now and arrest them, we're going to have a huge problem on our hands, and we're not going to be able to protect the statue itself. Now, if you fast forward a little farther beyond that, when we asked the BCA to come and help with the criminal investigation about what's occurring, the person and others, some of those involved, have been entirely cooperative. Once they're involved, they have to consult with the county attorney's office, and there needs to be a temporal connection to what occurred. So we can't just, like, in my opinion, in my experience, the next day or 10 hours later arrest someone unless there's a strategy that's employed to do that. But in this case, and I can't get into great detail, and it's the BCA's purview, perhaps the commissioner would like to say more, there's strategy involved with investigating this case. And the strategy that's not involved is just go as slow as possible. And so yesterday, as my opening remarks say, 3 of the individuals were submitted for potential charges, and there continues to be investigation on others that are involved.
Senator Howell.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and Colonel Langer, thanks for that answer. But I guess that goes against, that is, in my viewpoint, why we should have arrested him at that point, because you know that 3 people on 2 ropes didn't pull that statue down as fast as it came down. So if we would have arrested him at that time, whoever was on a rope, we would have known who they were. We would have known all that. And I guess I understand the rising of tensions and threat level and trying to keep that from escalating, but we, you know, by looking at that group and looking at, I guess, and you're right, it's a decision that had to be made, and I'm used to those coming from the military and from the firefighting background, that does, you got to make those decisions, you got to live with those decisions. And it's easy for us to sit here and second guess that, but I tell you what, it sure puts that thing, it puts it in everybody's mind that, well, we can go down and tear down any statue. We can deface anything down here, and nothing's going to happen to us. And that's the message that was sent out to greater Minnesota, or out to all Minnesotans right now, is that there is no consequences. And it's good to see 3 people charged, but that's a pretty minute number compared to what I seen on the video and who was on that ropes taking that statue down.
Colonel Langer.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Senator Howell, as I've said, it's a fair criticism to say that the individual you saw on TV should have been arrested that night. That was exactly the discussion that we had, and that was my preference. Again, the people on scene that I trusted said, Colonel, that's a bad idea. And I know from your years in the military and the fire service, it's a dangerous thing to say, I don't care if you think it's a bad idea, do it anyway. But I completely understand the frustration, and all I can say is it is not the State Patrol's mission to allow lawlessness. It is our mission to uphold the law with our core values intact. Sometimes that includes making an arrest at the time. Sometimes that includes people being charged by formal complaint after review by a county attorney's office. But I don't stand here today and say that I'm not aware of, or at times can be conflicted, because like many others, if I look back on an incident personally, rarely do I say, I did perfectly there. I always say, I think there was some room for improvement. So the criticism is fair, and I can take that, and we learn from it. I'm not going to argue that point.
Senator Dibble, did you have a question to Senator Howell's point?
Well, I have a different perspective. I can share it now or at any time.
Well, if you're not next on the list, if you have a question to Senator Howell's point, I'll entertain it at this time. If not, I will go back to the list and come back to you later. You tell me what.
Thanks. You can come back to me later, but in the meantime, you know, I would refer members. I'm going to be referring to this document, the policy of the Minnesota State Patrol that I think you had distributed, Mr. Chair. Folks would.
Okay.
I would commend everyone to read it. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Senator Dibble. Senator Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Colonel Langer, again, you know I trust and respect you. I have a couple questions. First off, during the incident on June 10th, was there a field report or incident report done on that? On
Colonel
the
Langer.
destruction of property?
Mr. Chair and Senator Hall, there are absolutely reports that are generated. They're just part of the active criminal investigation.
Could we be sent those reports
Senator
to
Hall.
the committee?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Hall, I can certainly make that request.
Thank you.
Senator Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secondly, was there then a debriefing after the incident by your group?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Hall, we have not done a formal after action on this incident, but we have certainly talked about it amongst our command staff and amongst the Capitol Security leadership to figure out what we learned from it initially and what we can do to prevent other similar acts that would be under our jurisdiction.
Good. Could we be sent?
Senator Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could we be sent that report, if we want to call it that? What are the things, what are the lessons learned through this?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair and Senator Hall, if we have data generated as part of that review, I'd be happy to provide what we can under the law.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Hall.
And lastly, there's discussion on orders that were given to you, and I don't want to mince words here, but sometimes we aren't given orders, but we're given kind of instructions. Were there ever instructions given to you by Commissioner Harrington or the administration on how to handle this situation or how not to handle it?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair and Senator Hall, everything that I've characterized so far about the plan and our role that day and my discussions with Commissioner Harrington are accurate. There's no hidden side conversation, no matter what you want to call it, it didn't happen.
Thank you.
Senator Dibble, I'm going to come to you. Just give me one moment. Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There seems to be an effort here to second guess the decisions of the State Patrol and to try to insert some sort of belief or narrative that somehow those outside of law enforcement had a political agenda to make sure that the circumstances unfolded in a particular way. I think we've now shown that that's not the case, and we've also shown that, in fact, the State Patrol...
Mr. Chair.
Senator Hall.
I have a hard time listening to Senator Dibble if he's going to question our motives.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Dibble, I would comment to you that raising the specter that senators would be doing this for political purposes would augur towards motive. I would ask that you not...
Mr. Chair, I have not done that in any way. I've only stated objective facts. I have not questioned any motives, so I object to the objection, the effort to interrupt my line of discussion here.
As I was saying, and you'll have an opportunity to respond, Senator Dibble. I did hear a mention of the line of questioning is being done for political purposes.
Tell me how, Mr. Chair. How did I? What did I say that implied political motive?
Senator Dibble, if you could just refrain from interrupting me, I will give you an opportunity to respond. And all I am trying to do is remind the members of the committee that motive is not a proper topic for senators to use. Senator Dibble.
Mr. Chair, did Senator Jasinski state that he believes that someone gave the order to allow the State Patrol to stand down, to cause the State Patrol to stand down. Did Senator Jasinski make that statement earlier when he had the microphone? He said he believed. Did he say that?
Do you have anything further?
Mr. Chair, that's a question.
And
if I could ask Senator
my
Jasinski.
response is, an objection was made. I have made a suggestion. I would like to move on with your questions, Senator Dibble. So
Well, Mr. Chair, I will again state that it has been said by members of this committee that they believe that orders were given to the State Patrol by political leadership to allow the statute to be toppled and to disallow any arrests. That statement of belief has been made by members of this committee. Whether or not that goes to anyone's political motive is not for me to judge or to say. That's been stated. I am restating that.
Fair enough.
I will now call attention to the fact that Colonel Langer has unequivocally said that that has not happened, number one. Number two, Colonel Langer has also stated that the incident commander is tasked with making the decisions about how to handle a particular incident, including whether arrests should be made in the interests of public safety. He said that. And I will also point out that, in fact, the State Patrol is acting in a way that is consistent with a general order, a policy that was made effective in July of last year that says such things as the State Patrol's responses shall be measured and appropriate for the situation under their guiding principles, that their presence is to preserve peace, protect public safety, provide traffic safety service, prevent destruction of property. Arrests should be only made when necessary after considering a totality of the circumstances to protect life and property. If you look to the final page, page 4, under arrests, that if practicable, this would include appropriate dispersal warnings and advisements and a reasonable response to any resistance encountered before any arrest. Mass arrest should only be employed when alternative strategies appear to be futile or are unsuccessful. Resources are available. Resources are present to do a number of things. Mass arrest shall only be undertaken upon the order of the incident commander or designee. So, Mr. Chair, I think I appreciate this hearing, and I think we've established now that, in fact, the stated belief of members isn't borne out by the totality of the evidence. And in fact, I think Colonel Langer and the State Patrol is to be commended for handling this incident in a way that minimized the danger to themselves, the danger to those who are gathered, the ability to create, or the danger of creating a larger negative dynamic. And in fact, in the ensuing weeks, investigations have been conducted. And contrary to an earlier statement in which Senator Howe said there is no consequence for anyone and only 3 have been charged, that in fact 3 have been charged or will potentially be charged with a crime, that has been advanced to the Ramsey County Attorney's Office, and more are under investigation. So, if folks did bring in a set of preformed conclusions, some motivated reasoning, some looking for some confirmation bias here, we've shown that, in fact, if we're open and available to the objective evidence and the data and the facts and the policies, we see that that those aren't borne out, and we actually have probably a textbook example of an incident, while regrettable, and a violation of the law, to be sure. And just so you know, Mr. Chair, I got my start. I talk about my, quote, origin story as breaking the law to make political points, and I was arrested and charged with crimes. That's part of what goes along with the decision to violate the law to make your political points. A law has been broken. People will probably be charged and face the consequences for that. But the fact that no one was hurt and the breaking of the laws is being dealt with is, I think, a classic case of law enforcement handling a matter in a way that is appropriate to the larger circumstances and not creating a larger negative dynamic, as I think as we dig further into some of the evidence of what happened in Minneapolis on those unfortunate nights. In fact, there were efforts to exacerbate and escalate tension that created even more unfortunate circumstances for which law enforcement is going to have to take responsibility. But I think the State Patrol acted admirably in this instance. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dibble. Senator Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Colonel Langer, thank you for being here, although I'm sorry you have to be. I'm sorry that we're living through this, that Minnesota's been put on the spot once again for something that's also happening nationwide, but I commend your efforts and all of your troopers that you oversee. I don't know how you do the job you do. People say that of the job we're doing, but I just want to say I not only trust you and respect you, but thank you for continuing to be doing what you do. And again, I'm sorry that you have to be here today. You know, I just have a few questions regarding how you prepare for incidents like this. You mentioned this was a Facebook post, and it was, you had a few, I don't know if it was days or hours before you were mobilized for those 35 troopers. I was here at the Capitol complex for the Black Lives Matter rally on Sunday, May 31st. And I made the unfortunate mistake of using my badge to park in the garage and come through the tunnel and came into the Capitol complex and realized that it was full of troopers and National Guard men and women. And I was there with Senator Torres Ray. We were the only civilians there. It was surreal coming to work and seeing that and see how much goes on behind the scenes. Obviously, we were not supposed to be there. We got escorted out to past the perimeter. And I think after that, I think you probably figured out that perimeter for people like us who didn't really follow the rules. But we thank you for protecting the Capitol. I served on the CAP board my first term. So I'm aware of the CAP board because most people aren't until this happened. Now they do. We talked about the changes and renovations in the Capitol complex area. It's always been a positive thing. We meet regularly. I was there when the chair was the Lieutenant Governor, Tina Smith. So I do not recall at any point talking about controversial monuments or a process to remove them. So I'm glad that this conversation is happening, that they're looking into our state's symbols and flags. And, you know, we look at other countries and symbols and flags and things like this are really important for people of all different backgrounds. There's always someone who's going to be pro or against. I mean, look at Northern Ireland, which I had a privilege to go to. They're still fighting about symbols and flags. They are ingrained in their culture and their religion, and they're important for people. So we have to come respecting people's perspective of what these mean. I'm not going to go into the details of why pro and anti Christopher Columbus. I grew up in Puerto Rico. There's huge monuments of Christopher Columbus. In fact, my hometown fights over the town next door of where he came in. And I religiously was taught in school the entire Christopher Columbus background of discovering America, never talking about the negative. So we do have to look at that, and maybe that's another conversation for another day. But my question regarding the rallies, again, for the Black Lives Matter rally, there were thousands of people here, I would say. You probably know the numbers. How long did you have to prepare? How many people? I mean, this is really shortly after Memorial Day and the tragic killing of George Floyd, so you probably had to mobilize pretty quickly. Can you give us a sense of what that looks like? And I want to compare it to this one because I believe this one we were expecting maybe 100 people that were confirmed that were supposed to be here at 5 o'clock. And I know that the Black Lives Matter rally was peaceful. It was loud, but it was peaceful, and people were hanging from different parts and monuments, and honestly, some of them could have toppled down because people get up into parts of the Capitol that they probably shouldn't, and we realized that we probably should look into securing these monuments because they could pose a public risk. Can you talk about just briefly how you mobilize for something like that rally, and we've done this before, but I don't believe we've ever had the National Guard here for any rally since I've been here. And how many soldiers and how many troopers were here, and how much time you had to mobilize, and how you do that without arresting anyone. I mean, no one was hurt in that rally, and it was peaceful. So I want to compare it because we're talking about this incident, and it seems small in comparison to a Black Lives Matter rally with thousands of people. But I just want people to understand, and the public to see how you prepare for these to keep the public safe, and how well you did back on May 31st. Can you just give us a little sense of what that looks like? Thank you.
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Franzen, so I think the best way to characterize it is the planning depends on the event, and it's so there's so many different ways that these events come in. You know, one event might be someone that pulls a permit from the Department of Administration and says, I am the leader of an event, here's what we're doing, we want the rotunda, or we want the front steps, or we want a portion of the Capitol complex, and here's what we're going to do. And they rent loudspeakers, and they rent platforms, and they do everything through the Department of Administration, and we have like this process that works for us to understand exactly what to expect. You have ownership of someone who says, I'm in charge of the group. Contrast that with other events where people say, or we hear, we're coming to the Capitol. And we're like, not exactly sure who, not exactly sure what their intent might be, not exactly sure what they're actually going to do. Because there's a fair number of events that are just like chatter that don't ever materialize. And there's a fair number of events that might be, years ago we could probably depend more on, in this case, 98 going, 690 interested. We look into our crystal ball and we figure out how many people will actually show up. I would say recently that's been less and less helpful, which makes it a little more difficult for us, because the question for us always is, how many troopers and Capitol security officers do we need for an event? And if there's one thing that I've been proven right on every single time, in hindsight, we either had too many or not enough. Every single time. And so logic would tell you through much of the events after Memorial Day at the Capitol, in hindsight, way too many troopers, way too many National Guard soldiers versus what we actually encountered. That ended up being a good thing, because nothing happened that was remarkable throughout that entire week. So I don't know that I did a great job of answering your question, other than it's looking at the intelligence, it's looking at what we can get on open source, which is primarily where we get the information, engaging with people. Sometimes they're more than willing to engage with us and say, yep, I'm the leader, and other times not so much. And so it's just a dynamic, difficult situation every single time. But the people that we have, our special response team and the troopers that come here regularly, in fact, the troopers that you see here today, they're the ones that are here all the time for events, and they're the ones that are just used to encountering people that might want to do harm, or encountering two senators that popped out of the Capitol when they probably didn't even know who you were, and handling both of those dynamics flawlessly.
Senator Franzen.
Thank you, and I'm glad you didn't arrest me. We were peaceful, but it was suspicious. Random civilians coming and seeing cots, and I saw the mountains of chemicals. I mean, this is real. This is what we saw behind the scenes that I think a lot of Minnesotans weren't able to see, and maybe some pictures, because I know some reporters took pictures, and it was surreal. I mean, I was driving today to come into the Capitol, and still our Capitol is barricaded. And that's a sad sight, that we are still living in a moment with a lot of tenuous energy. And if we, I hear Senator Jasinski talking about being mad and angry. If we take that mad and, that anger and spend as much time as we spent today, and we're not even done, we have another testifier coming, Commissioner Harrington, in talking about why this even happened. Why did it propel someone to come and take that action and destroy private property, or public property in this case? We talk about supporting our troops and supporting our police, and God, we have to, because we have to have a safe community. But are we having the same conversation about, when it goes the wrong way, when there's excessive force? And in this case, there's discretion, there's de-escalation. We usually ask for that, and we're questioning that today. And I urge members to also spend some time Back on Memorial Day, when someone was killed, it wasn't a statute. It wasn't breathing. Let's spend that much time that we spend today on talking about that incident and why it happened and the consequences that led to it and the tragic result. I think Minnesotans want that. That's the outrage I've heard in my district. That's the outrage I've heard across the entire state, Senator Jasinski. We can talk about public property, private property. We have to have rule of law. No one's questioning that. There's a process. But we also have to go back and talk about the root of the problem, which we usually have a hard time doing in this body. Let's talk about that. Let's have a hearing of why that happened, why George Floyd died, what was wrong with that process. We haven't had the opportunity. So I'm fine with being here an entire day to talk about a monument and a statue in the Capitol complex. This is the place I work, and I want it to be safe for not just myself, but for everyone that visits. But let's find time to also talk about those 8 minutes and 46 seconds that took someone's life away. Let's find 2 or 3 hours of our day of our hearings to talk about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Only response I would have, and I will say this for Colonel Langer, the purpose of this inquiry is to figure out what actually happened in terms of Capitol security and the damage to Capitol or property here at the Capitol. That's the purpose of this hearing. There are other hearings that undoubtedly will be held on other topics and other subjects. But for purposes of what we are doing here today, it is a proper inquiry. And Colonel Langer, you have come forward and you have testified and you have provided us with information that I think is really valuable to us because we will be faced with undoubtedly proposed legislation coming forward in the future with respect to what happened, particularly on June 10th. And so I see no reason why we cannot have this discussion. And I think what we're doing is arriving at what some of the facts are, as opposed to a lot of rumor and innuendo and, frankly, outright falsehoods that is circulating throughout the community. So, Colonel Langer, you have been very helpful today in answering our questions, and I want you to know that I do appreciate it. Senator Osmek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, Colonel Langer, I'm not sorry you're here today. I'm glad you're here today because members of my community, whether that be here in Hennepin or in Hennepin County or north of Hennepin County, Crow Wing County, any number of places that I have been to over the interim, are very frustrated with what happened here. It really is sad to see chain link fence around the Capitol, but tolerance of lawless behavior begats more lawless behavior. And I think we have been witnessing that. And I appreciate your direct answers to the questions. I hope that we continue to have those today. But to say that we should just all move along and not ask questions and continue to set facts on the table is not doing our job. And that's why we're here today, is to actually do our job. So with that in mind, I do have a couple of quick questions. One, you indicated that, I believe you said yesterday, that the case for 3 individuals were referred to the Hennepin or to Ramsey County, to their attorney, their county attorney's office. Are those documents public and available for the committee to have a copy of, or are those considered private at this point in time until such time as the case goes forward?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Oswick, my understanding is that those documents would not be public until such time as there might be a criminal complaint, and then that, of course, would be public.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Oswick.
At such time that they are available, I believe that we as a committee would like to see them at the earliest possible opportunity. It may take us time, but I'm willing to wait patiently to see that referral. couple questions regarding public safety at the Capitol. Do you believe that force is sometimes necessary and needed to protect the safety of lawmakers, the public, and Capitol property from rioters?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Osmic, yes.
Thank you. Have you ever been
Senator
told, sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. Have you ever been told not to use force when you believed it was absolutely necessary to protect property and life?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Osmic, no, I haven't been told that. I've been told that we operate consistent with our training and experience, and we operate with wisdom and common sense and our core values in mind.
Senator Osmic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One final question. And these are all setting the stage so that we understand that there was no order. People may believe that. I just want to make sure it's on the record that we have answers to these questions, because that puts at rest some of the concerns that people in Minnesota have. One final question. Do you think that it's possible you could be ordered by a superior to use less force than you believe is necessary for an event that occurs?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair and Senator Osmic, I certainly have a boss, and so I suppose that's possible. It just hasn't been my experience.
Okay. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Senator Osmic.
Thank you for being here again. I'm glad you're here. I believe Minnesotans want to know what happened, because this criminal activity that resulted in damage of property has sprouted beyond the confines of this state, I believe. That this can't continue. And I would be here saying the same questions to you if somebody went and grabbed a couple ropes and threw it around Hubert H. Humphrey's statue that's on the mall and drug that down. Or if someone destroyed the Peace Officers Memorial that's just in the same area. I'd be asking the exact same questions. This has nothing to do with the individual or the person being honored, so to speak, by the statue. This has everything to do with the property of the state of Minnesota and what individuals did with lawless behavior that need to be held accountable. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Senator Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Franzen took some of my points, so I'm going to try to abbreviate some of it so as not to be repetitive. But, I do want to go back to that, that context of where we were. And Colonel Langer, I'll just say from my own perspective, because I was on the phone late into the night, several nights, working with my members from across Minneapolis and St. Paul and the command center, trying to get responses out into those communities. And I know, because I saw it firsthand, the incredible coordination in a completely unprecedented moment that went on to bring in many resources to keep Minnesotans safe. And I think it's important, and we've seen some conversation about this, to remember we're talking about the Department of Public Safety. Public safety is what is at issue here. When we think about that moment of June 10th, it is important to remember that this was shortly after all of us watched in horror that video of 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And the emotions that brought up for so many people, not just here, but around the world, were immense. And we knew we were all operating in that environment. I will also remind my colleagues that June 10th was 2 days before we were going to start a special session. And I was privy to conversations about security concerns regarding that special session and preparations that were being made to make sure that we could operate safely during that special session. So I remember where we were in that moment pretty clearly. And this conversation about decisions that are made, whether we do too much or we don't do enough, this question that Senator Osmic raised about a tolerance of lawlessness, of lawless behavior, and the effects that has, but also on the other side, the risks that are run of not de-escalating, but escalating a situation, and I think you've done a good job of addressing some of that today. I do have a specific question, a couple of questions I would ask. So internally, has there been or will there be a review and after-incident analysis about what happened on June 10th and how you would move forward with that information?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Kent, I'll let the commissioner speak to other issues about a review of the time period that has been called into question by this committee. We have a statewide captains meeting that's a standard practice for us next week. We have one day set aside to discuss all of the things that have been brought up here and then some related to what the State Patrol has specifically done. One of the things that I have always said is what I previously testified to. We're not perfect. I'm okay with making mistakes. I'm not okay with making the same mistake twice if we can help it. And so that means we have to learn and apply what we learned. And I can tell you that the culture of the Minnesota State Patrol is to have extremely candid conversation internally. We don't go back and say, well, that went well. We go back and say, what can we do different? And that's exactly what we intend to do with everything that this committee will be discussing.
Thank you, Colonel. And I think that's important. Thank you, Mr. Chair, because none of us are perfect. It is the sign of a healthy organization to have those important conversations and to look at it with a clear eye and figure out how to move forward. And in that spirit, because there's been a lot of focus on second-guessing decisions that were made, would you just take a minute and reflect on what went right on June 10th?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair and Senator Kent, I think, I'm involved with the State and Provincial Police Association, a division of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. I'm the incoming general chair. Many of my peer state agencies also secure their capital complexes. Not all, but many of them do. The issues are the same across the country with these types of challenges. Do we use force? What does decorum mean in a committee hearing? How do we enforce decorum? How do we deal with First Amendment protesters? How do we deal with people carrying signs in a committee hearing? These are not unique challenges to Minnesota. They're unique challenges to being the law enforcement agency in charge of a capital. What I think went right as I engage with my peers and I read the news stories is around the country, disobedience has been sort of the norm lately in many ways. Part of that disobedience has been the removal or the destruction of property, including statues. And so I'm not minimizing what occurred here at all, and I'm not suggesting that this was flawless or a victory in the end for our organization or the state of Minnesota. But in the end, the statute came down illegally. Nobody was hurt. We know who did it, and we have the statute. And again, I'm not minimizing or oversimplifying because I wish that it wasn't the case that this occurred in the manner that it did. But I will say the fact that we have the statute, we know who did it, I expect accountability and nobody was hurt is a lot more than other places can say as they're dealing with this same issue.
Done. Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Chair Newman. Colonel Langer, I'm a Vietnam era veteran, and I'd just like to know that if protesters such as what happened on June 10th were to come, and because I remember being, before I joined the military, many protesters doing the same type of situation, would it be okay for Vietnam era protesters to come in and destroy Capitol property such as the Vietnam Veterans Memorial?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator, no, that would not be appropriate.
Senator
Is it,
Anderson.
thank you, Mr. Chairman, is it your consensus that it is the prerogative of the State Patrol to protect the property of the state of Minnesota, as was mentioned earlier?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Senjum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Colonel Langer, I have
I have a short, I think, to the point question. We have a volatile place here at times at the state capitol. Lots of issues come before this building, this group. We have other statues out there that are potentially at risk. We have other artifacts out there that potentially are at risk. Somehow, in the case of Christopher Columbus, that we failed. So the question, pure and simple, is what can we do, what should we do collectively, the legislature, the administration, the law enforcement community around the Capitol? What do we need to do to stop this from ever happening again? That is the question. What do we need to do?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair and Senator Senjum, I think that's a great question and one that I've wrestled with, because what people would like to hear from me as the Colonel, I believe, is that there will never be another act of criminal activity on the Capitol complex again. There will never be graffiti on a building ever again. And I believe in every fiber of who I am, I wish that I could tell you that that would be the case. I think reality tells us that's unlikely to be the case. But there are, of course, legislative pieces of legislation that could help us or be considered. There's the Advisory Committee on Capitol Security that was put forward specifically to consider these types of questions and to be the body that guides the direction of the State Patrol through the Governor and the Commissioner of Public Safety to figure out the best way to do security on the Capitol complex. I'm certainly all ears for ways in which we can improve. I'm willing to be part of any group to talk about that, whether it's part of the formal groups or other groups that could be put together. But I think the environment within which we're living right now informs me from a common sense perspective and in my professional role that we ought to have some really tough conversations about how we do security on the Capitol complex.
Thank you, Colonel. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Colonel Langer, for coming in today. Really appreciate the opportunity to ask you some questions. As others have said, you know, my district has looked at this and the toppling of the statue, and I'm getting a lot of questions on that. And so with that, I just want to lay out a couple of things here that I don't quite understand as well. We were handed out this general order 25-014. Could you tell me a little bit about what a general order is?
Mr. Chair. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair and Senator Johnson, so general orders are what we refer to, that most places call policies, but for us we refer to them as general orders. And they are definitely the guiding documents as to how the Minnesota State Patrol conducts themselves. In this case, with that general order you have in front of you, specific to First Amendment assemblies and demonstrations and protests.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you. Mr. Chair and Colonel Langer, so what authority does this have for our the troopers then?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair and Senator, our general orders are structured such that they provide guidance. They provide an overall philosophy. They provide definitions, if appropriate. They include rules at times, some specific language. We wrestle with when it should say shall, when it should say should, and those types of things that are always part of legislation and policy work. But those general orders guide the organization from trooper to colonel, Capitol Security Officer, dispatcher, support staff, and everyone involved in terms of the operating philosophy and policies of the organization.
Senator Johnson.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Colonel Langer. I appreciate that. And I really appreciate the fact that you say this works well with the statutes. It works together hand in glove with the Minnesota statutes. You know, in this particular document, the general order in the guiding principles on third point here, C, part of the responsibility is to prevent destruction of property. In 609.595, that's the damage of property statute, and anything over $1,000, or if there's a risk of injury, that's a first degree. And as you pointed out, we saw there were children in that crowd. That statute could have toppled on somebody. There's some huge risks that were involved with that one. So we also know that the purpose of the organization that gathered that day, their sole reason for getting together was to pull down that statute. That was pretty clear that was their purpose. That's why they wanted to gather there. So we saw earlier in the week where the 3rd precinct was given up, and that was sacrificed. Later on, we learned our lesson. The 5th precinct in Minneapolis was surrounded and protected. We also saw with the 3rd precinct that really fueled a lot of the protests that were going on.
Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, I hate to interrupt, but I know earlier you chastised some members for getting off topic. So I think you could make that same comment right now.
Senator Johnson, stay on topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Pappas. I appreciate it. So what my question is instead of getting to the point where we have property damage, where we have to start making felony arrests, and that becomes a question for this committee and for the state at large, why wasn't a secure perimeter put around that statute? Being so we had the warning, we understand what the consequences of that property damage are. Why wasn't there anything to prevent that sort of damage in the first place?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Johnson, I think that the question is a good one, and it's one that I've played out in my head. I think it goes to some of my earlier comments. I'm very confident in the capabilities of the Minnesota State Patrol. And if I put 100 or 150 troopers shoulder to shoulder with the right equipment around that statue, I'm confident in our ability to defend that statue. To what end? I think internally plays and pulls at both my heart and my head, because that question is undoubtedly going to come up after the fact. And how successful were we going to be? And so I could speculate on and on and on, but I stand to tell you that I think that's a fair question and fair criticism. And hindsight being 20/20, maybe that's what we should have done, but I don't think it would have been without consequence. It just would have been perhaps different consequence.
Thank you.
Sort of begs the question, Colonel Langer, we put a fence up around the Capitol. Was it ever the thought of ever entertained putting a fence around that statue to protect it, given the specific threat?
Mr. Chair, that question was never posed to me. I don't know that it was considered.
Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll hold for now.
Thank you, Senator Dibble. Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. The questions have come up several times about what should have been done differently. And so I'd like to go to kind of the background of the issue, which was the objection to the Christopher Columbus statute, and whether there was a process that could have been used. And as Senator Franzen mentioned, the Capital Area Architectural Planning Board earlier, I serve on that board. I have for, I think, decades. And we acknowledged at our last meeting that there really is not a clear process, at least not involving us. And we have, the CAP board, have a major role to play in determining the statutes that would be on the Capitol Mall. The legislature can often authorize that, but we might do the design competition, et cetera. And we have a plan for the Capitol Mall. So I think that what happened, I know that what happened at our last meeting is that we, Lieutenant Governor set up several committees that are going to be looking at developing a process so that that is transparent and open to the public, so that when people do have concerns about various artwork or artifacts or statues, that there is a way that they can initiate us looking at whether that's still considered appropriate to be on the Capitol Mall. There is some concern, I know I've heard expressed, about the Lindbergh statue, who, while famous as an aviator, has a rather controversial reputation in terms of his connection with Nazi Germany during World War II and his attitude toward fascism and various things that he supported in the U.S. that I think is worth looking at. And I know the Jewish community is really concerned about that. So I think that we've kind of asked Colonel Langer the same questions over and over again, and he's answered them adequately. And certainly if this committee wants to pursue this further, then I think the discussion maybe would be with the staff from the Capital Area Architectural Board or the chair, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, about what the plan is to develop a process so that citizens don't feel like they have no other option but civil disobedience. And the other thing I did want to mention about that I'd heard this, and Colonel Langer, I think, can reinforce it, is that that statute wasn't actually very strongly attached to the base, which is why they were able to topple it in just 2 minutes. So I think the assumption was that, you know, a few people in a rope couldn't topple it, and there just wasn't time to interfere because it happened so quickly, and at least that's what I've been told. But the main point is that I think we do need to have a process for removal, and that is underway by the CAP Board. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pappas. And I know that in the video that we were shown, the Commissioner Harrington very clearly stated that there was a legal process to follow. I candidly will tell you I don't know what that legal process is. Perhaps it should be addressed by the CAP Board, and I would encourage that. However, having said that, resorting to criminal activity is not the proper process in removing property from the Capitol complex. At least that's my opinion. Senator Yazinski, you had to this point.
Senator Newman, to the point. So then what I would recommend for administration is we reinstall that statute and then go through the process. Because otherwise, we are promoting doing it lawlessly. So we have the statute, put it back up, and go through the process. That's the way we should do it. The statute, to my understanding, can be corrected, put back up, and then go through the process. That's what the people of Minnesota want. They want to go through the process. Lawlessness does not work. It does not work. We found that. It does not work. It promotes more. So I recommend the statute be put back up and go through a process and not be lawlessness. Thank you.
Senator Ingebretson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for those comments, and I agree, Senator Jasinski. In fact, myself and Senator Nelson have written a letter to the Historical Society, who has the final say on monuments or artifacts on the state capitol grounds before they're actually placed anywheres, and especially if they're removed. So the request is already in for them to find out what it does take to replace, and I think at the very least we should demand that. Colonel, I'm both happy and sad you're here, whatever. But I'm really saddened about the whole family of law enforcement that I grew up in and knew and was raised in is unfortunately on trial wherever you go now. And it was mentioned, Floyd. It was a horrible, horrible incident. And I know we're supposed to be functioning on this property here, but it's all going there. And really, law enforcement is kind of the front lines of government. We all know that. That's the first picture of government. And unfortunately, things have gotten carried away in anarchy, and craziness has taken over, and it's happening all over. I mean, total lawlessness. We got city councils now that are saying to disband police, and we're now finding out what that result is turning into. Little kids being shot. But Getting back to the statute, I have to ask a question. You have an emergency management plan here for the Capitol complex?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, little kids being shot, who's interjecting politics here? There are police in Minneapolis. No police have been disbanded.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Floyd was mentioned here earlier, and I think it was, quite fair to give my comments and tell us, get everybody a little idea as to what's going on here and who's really on the hot seat here and why. And I'd just like to preface that. But thank you, Senator Dibble, for once again interfering. But there is an emergency management plan, I'm assuming, and there are procedures that you follow through the plan here on the complex?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebretson, we have a full-time emergency manager as part of our staff at Capitol Security.
And who's the emergency
Senator
manager
Ingebretson.
now? Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebretson, her name is Jenny Kane.
Okay.
Senator Ingebretson.
Mr. Chair, was she involved at all in making any decisions at all about the situation that was going on?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebretson, Jenny Kane has been involved in a lot of the activities around security at the complex, which goes much beyond law enforcement. It's, anything that can happen at the complex, whether it's a thunderstorm, rain, power outage, you name it, that's part of emergency management. I don't think that she was actually involved in the event on June 10th involving the statue.
Senator Ingebretson.
Mr. Chair, thank you. So you don't think it rose to the extent of activating it or at least putting together a command center? Because I do understand emergency management.
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebretson, no, it wouldn't be our standard practice to stand up a incident command center or an emergency command center for an event like we experienced.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and a couple other questions here. The date of the incident was, again, somebody helped me out with that. It was the
June
incident.
10th.
On the 10th? Yes. And the county attorney just received the reports yesterday, you said?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebretson, correct. They received reports on 3 individuals yesterday
Senator
afternoon.
Ingebretson.
So, Mr. Chair, that's a long time. That's a long time of an investigation for something that was actually filmed, and we had folks right on the site that said that they wouldn't mind being arrested. They're going to do it just for their cause. They're going to be the martyr of the day or for whatever that cause was. It seems rather funny that these incidents now are going to the county attorney's office. Mr. Chair, if I might just suggest, all of a sudden the complaints, and I'm not pointing the finger at you, Colonel. Are you going to be the arresting agency, no doubt, or is it going to be the Department of Public Safety? BCA? I'm sorry, the BCA.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebretson, depending on what the county attorney does and what they elect to do in terms of taking anyone into custody, that would certainly be something the State Patrol has the statutory authority to do.
Okay. Thank you, Colonel, and Mr. Chair. So de-escalation is a word that should be used all the time and has been used in law enforcement for many years, contrary to the belief of a lot of people now. But you said de-escalation in this particular case worked very well by not actually physically arresting somebody. But if it would have gone on for a length of time, or if people would have realized what was going on down there, given the media streaming that goes on, and all of a sudden now you've got some people coming back to that particular area that are saying, no, we don't want this public property destroyed. Do you think you'd have had bigger problems?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebretson, certainly what I was thinking as this event was unfolding rapidly was how we prevent the state capitol from becoming the next spot of interest for a variety of reasons. And so when you mention, in my experience, you have a protest group, oftentimes it's the counter-protest group or the third protest group that becomes the issue. So I think to answer your question, certainly one of our concerns is always if you have Group A and Group B and they disagree philosophically, morally, religiously, or whatever, we work very hard to avoid conflict between those two groups and to keep it civil and within everyone's First Amendment right.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Ingebretson.
And absolutely, that's exactly what you want to do. There's no question about that, de-escalation and a lot less confrontation, physical or otherwise, is the best. During this, then this will be my last question. During this situation that was going on and was heating up at the Capitol, I know the Commissioner Harrington will be here, and I'll ask him this question as well. But was the governor and the lieutenant governor in contact or watching or overseeing the project that was going on, or the chaos that was going on at the Capitol complex? Do you know?
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebrigtsen, I can tell you on June 10th, it's not a normal practice for me. I wasn't involved with communication with either direct to the governor or the lieutenant governor.
So,
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So that'd be a question for Commissioner Harrington.
Colonel Langer.
I guess.
Chair Newman, Senator Ingebrigtsen, yeah, I think the chain of command, as I outlined before, holds true in this case.
Sure. And thank you, Senator and Mr. Chair, for indulging. Being, in law enforcement, I know the worst thing that can get involved in police work sometimes is politics. And being an elected sheriff, it was very clear that there are different chains of commands in different departments. You have city police departments, you have the state patrol, you also have sheriff's departments who take their marching orders from their boss. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. But you started your opening comments about this is not who we are. Law enforcement officers don't stand down too often, especially when they're being hollered at or yelled at. And in some cases now we're seeing spit at, feces thrown at, water dumped upon. And again, the marching orders come from up on top. And it's really unfortunate that law enforcement's on the hot seat here, and over one incident, and some will say many incidents that occurred in Minneapolis over the years, and hopefully that's going to get rectified here. Not overnight, obviously, but thank you again for coming and putting up with us.
Senator Osmek, you had a question on point?
Actually, more of a comment. I just wanted to make sure that everyone understands the statute that we're dealing with for these pieces of art around the Capitol. It is 15B.08 subdivision 3 specifically states, quote, no substantial change or improvement may be made to public lands or public buildings in the Capitol area without written approval by the board. My understanding further is that the last time anyone has put in a request to review the particular statue that was destroyed was 1987. It boggles the mind that we didn't have a process. It further boggles the mind that the people who are responsible for this claimed that they had been, quote unquote, working on this for decades, by their own words. And there has not been any activity through the legal authority that had the ability to make a change. It really, and it has nothing to do with Colonel Langer, and again, thank you for being here. It is important, but the fact that the statute is so clear, I could find it in less than one search, as well as a form, which incidentally is online right now for you to make comments to the June 25th meeting, which has already expired. You can actually make online comments to changes that you would suggest. But members, it's crystal clear what is in statute that has to be followed, and if you don't like the statute, change the law. You don't get to start hauling down pieces of government property that we all own as Minnesotans and engage in lawless activity in Minnesota. And Senator Jasinski, I agree with you. Rather than allowing lawless activity to continue in Minnesota, we should be putting things right and then following the process and discussing this and having a discussion at the CAP board whether this should be here or not in Minnesota, as well as other statutes. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, to that point.
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Mr. Chair, thank you. And Senator Osmick, so you really think the process is going to be followed when you have the Lieutenant Governor saying she really didn't mind it being torn down? I've researched this for quite some time, and you're right, there is a process. But when you have the chair of the board saying that she doesn't mind this gets torn down, I think the process is probably going to be somewhat tainted.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Engelbretson, I would take that as a rhetorical question.
Mr. Chair.
And somewhat argumentative. Senator Dibble.
Mr. Chair, could we please replay the full extent of the Lieutenant Governor's comments? Because I think Senator Engelbretson has mischaracterized what the Lieutenant Governor has said to the point of actually stating the opposite of what the Lieutenant Governor has said.
I thank you for the suggestion, Senator Dibble. I think we, instead of replaying, what we will do is let each individual member rely on their memory as to what they saw. I can have, if you wish, a copy of the video sent to each member. But no, I don't think we're going to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll have the video, a transcript of the extent of her comments.
That's fine, Senator.
Typed up and distributed because, in fact, she said there is a process that should have been followed and the law was broken. And in fact, one of the problems identified is the fact that no one even knows who the heck the CAP is and how to even engage the process.
Senator Dibble, I'm not arguing with you. I am simply saying that each member saw that video and can rely on what they saw insofar as their memory is concerned.
And Mr. Chair, I would also then stipulate that Senator Engelbretson was questioning the motives, the political motives, and words of the Lieutenant Governor. So if we're going to be harsh about falsely claiming political motive on the part of some, let's be
and if you recall, Senator Dibble, I indicated that I found his comment argumentative. Colonel Langer, on behalf of myself and all of the members of this joint committee, I just want to thank you for coming in. You've been sitting there for a number of hours now, and you have fielded our questions and explained as best you can, and I just want you to know that we really do appreciate the fact that you have done that. I personally am looking for factual information as to what occurred, and I want to do that in the context of perhaps we can do it better in the future. And you are a primary source of information for this committee, and you always have been, and you've always been very cooperative. So again, I do wish to thank you for coming in and fielding all of our questions. With that, members, we're going to take a 1.5 hour break, or for a recess, and then we will return. So we're in recess.